Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Council of UC Staff Assembly's Spring Quarter Staff Town Hall. My name is Jen Bowser, and I am the chair of CUCSA. I work at UC Santa Barbara, and I have 10 years of service. If you're not familiar with CUCSA, we are an assembly of volunteer staff dedicated to improving communications between UC administrators and staff. Our objective has been to provide service to the university by advising and providing a staff perspective to decision makers. See in this video here, or in this photo here, CUCSA consists of 2 delegates from each UC campus, Ag and Natural Resources, Berkeley Lab, and the Office of the President. We act in the interest of all UC staff, but particularly non-represented policy cover staff, whose relationship with the university is governed by policy rather than collective bargaining agreements. Today, our town hall will feature Regents Vice Chair Maria Anguiano. Vice Chair Anguiano will share her background, the role of the Regents in university governance, and address the challenges UC faces, including state budget cuts, potential reductions in federal funding. We are recording the session today, and we will post it to YouTube for those who are not available to join us today. And the link to the recording will be posted on our website and sent via social media and our newsletter. To begin, let us acknowledge the land that we work, live, and play. The Council of UC Staff Assemblies recognizes that our service occurs on the unceded territory of the Indigenous peoples of California, and that these lands were and continue to be of great importance to them. Every member of our community has and continues to benefit from the use and stewardship of these lands. With respect and gratitude, we acknowledge and make visible our relationship to the original caretakers. We just want to provide some updates of what CUCSA has been up to since our last town hall in October. So on November 1st, 12 delegates served on a presidential search staff advisory committee. We offered valuable perspectives to the Regents Special Committee on Criteria for the next UC president. The committee provided a platform for staff to share insights on the qualities and leadership attributes they hope to see in our future president, ensuring that staff voices are an integral part of the selection process. To learn more about the presidential search, you can click on the link that will be in the chat momentarily. Since our last town hall, the delegation has met both at UCLA in December and UC Davis at the beginning of March. Meeting summaries for our meetings can be found on CUCSA's homepage. I want to thank both of the campuses for hosting us. Our next quarterly meeting will be held at UC Berkeley in early June. In mid-February, CUCSA past chair Dennis McIver and I interviewed President Drake, and highlights from that town hall and a link to the recording can be found in the link that's being provided in the chat. And our last update, since 2011, CUCSA has offered system-wide awards to outstanding staff and leaders. And we're pleased to share today the recipients of our 2025 awards. Thank you to these individuals who are supportive and inclusive of UC staff and encourage equity, diversity, and community. Congrats, and we look forward to celebrating you. I'll now turn this over to our chair-elect, Desiree Hennon.
Thanks, Jen. Last year, CUCSA Policy Covered Staff Identities Work Group highlighted a recommendation that was the intentional creation of opportunities for meaningful two-way communication between non-represented staff and leadership. This came out of the informal questionnaire that the work group conducted, which reflected how many of the non-represented staff they heard from expressed a sense of lines of communication between staff leaders across all levels were weaker than before the pandemic and felt less transparent and authentic. They felt improved communication would help build connection to their locations and to UC, and also help staff feel more seen and included. With that in mind, we have restructured our quarterly town halls to feature system-wide leaders, like the one today with Vice Chair Anguiano. Regent Maria Anguiano is currently serving as Vice Chair of the Board of Regents. Vice Chair Anguiano has dedicated her career to expanding educational opportunity and supporting students in all backgrounds. In her prior role as the Executive Vice President of Arizona State University's Learning Enterprise, she launched a global education program focused on lifelong learning. She also served as Chief Financial Officer for the EdTech startup Minerva Project. but her service to the Board of Regents is really a homecoming. She previously served in roles at the University of California, including Vice Chancellor of Planning and Budget at UC Riverside, and on key system-wide financial and strategic initiatives at Office of the President. She currently serves on the boards of the James Irvine Foundation and the KIPP Foundation, organizations that advance access to opportunities, education, and economic mobility, and has advised for the Campaign for College Opportunity and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She grew up in National City in San Diego County and earned an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business and a BA from the Claremont McKenna College. Anguiano was appointed as the regent by Governor Brown in June 2017 for a term ending in 2028. At the conclusion of our presentation, we begin with selected questions that were submitted with the webinar registration. If you'd like to ask additional questions during the town hall, please type in your questions using the Q&A button in the Zoom. And if there is time at the end, we will get to the live questions. So it's now my pleasure to welcome Regents Vice Chair Maria Anguiano. Maria, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here with CUCSA. And I know I can't see everyone, but really honored and privileged to be with you here. I started my career at UC as an assistant director back in 2009. So it's been a really long road, and really happy to be here.
So first we'll start off, as we mentioned a little bit of your career trajectory, but would you mind expanding on that a little bit and what motivated you to work in education?
Thank you. Well, I'll say that it was a long road in education, and it was a long road to get to the educational pathway. I was reflecting about where UC is right now and our challenges that we're facing. And I was reflecting on the question around my career trajectory and my childhood. And I grew up in National City, which for those of you that don't know is like 7 miles from the Mexican border, pretty much a 80% Latino low-income area. And, my mom had a 6th grade education. She was raising me and my brother and my sister as a single mom. So going to college wasn't necessarily something that was like, oh, that's going to happen to you, right? It was something that my mom was passionate about because she didn't get to have an education past 6th grade. In Mexico, you had to pay to go to school after 6th grade. And so we were really grateful that we lived in the US where education was free, right? Until high school, which is a privilege we should not take for granted. And then figuring out how to pay for college, how to go to college, what was college was a big, it was a big open question. And I think that before I used to think about how difficult the path was, and now I reflect on how grateful I am for that path, because it really informs how I think about the work now, right? And how I think about access and affordability and outreach. And so I'm really grateful for having been a first generation student and having had that experience. And the other thing I'll say, and this is something we'll get into as we're talking about challenges, is human beings are very resilient, and so are organizations, right? And I went to 6 elementary schools. So every year I'd have to find new friends, figure out what the school was. And it always felt super, super hard when I first did it, right? And then you're like, oh, I survived. It was okay. I made it through. And I feel like that's something I just really want to emphasize in today's talk is we're resilient. We've been here before. We're going to get through it. It's going to be okay, right? And that I had to remind myself, remember the 6 times you had to change school and it was okay, right? And I think I remember since at least I've been in 09, we've been in several budget crunches and several budget issues over the years. But before I jump to that, I'll start with the job. So I finished college, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Mostly because, again, I didn't know anyone that had gone to college other than my teachers. And I definitely didn't quite want to do that. So my mom said, you should do something practical, something where you can get a good job. And so I ended up as a CPA, as an accountant at Deloitte as my first job. And, again, really grateful for the experience because it taught me about finances, how to be a professional. Because what people don't forget is that first generation students are also first generation professionals. And so you don't necessarily know how to be in the workplace either when you first show up, right, to a professional workspace. And so I was really grateful for Deloitte for really ensuring that was a robust part of like the kind of the orientation process for new accountants at Deloitte. But quickly I realized that I was not accounting is all about the past and I'm a futurist. And so I was like, oh, really bad fit for me. And I was very lucky to have had a mentor in college that was like, you know what, it's okay. You can go to something called a business school, and in business school, you get to start over. And I was like, you do? I was like, great. He's like, you can pick another career. And so I was like, okay, I get a second chance. And so I ended up applying and got into Stanford Business School. And again, from recommendation of my professor, and ended up with $70,000 of debt. And I like to talk about that because we don't talk about the cost of education and what that means for choices people make. And so I think it's important that we share about that. And so, yeah, I had $70,000 of debt. And I was like, "Ooh, what? I can't." I, at that point, really wanted to go into education. And I felt like I wouldn't be able to pay off my debt if I did. And again, by chance, somebody was like, well, there's something that you can do to mix both your passion and education, and something that maybe makes, enough money for you to pay off your debt is a public finance investment banking. So public finance investment banking is basically the bankers to UC and other public entities that issue the bonds, right? So super exciting, but it is exciting because it's how we get UC, like how we pay for our buildings, how we pay for housing, how cities pay for. I worked on the Bay Area Toll Authority and got to like work on the financing to build the new Bay Bridge. And like, what does that look like over 30 years and things like that. And so again, I learned a lot about financial projections, how to think about long-term planning for public infrastructure. And after 4 years, I knew that it was time to go to what my real passion was, which is like really marry my two passions of like, I had learned the skill set of finance, but my passion was in education. And I was very lucky to be able to have gotten the job as an assistant director at the Office of the President under the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. He was the first Chief Financial Officer of the system, Peter Taylor, if any of you are been around for that long. And it was the 2009 crash. So UC at the time had lost $1 billion of its funding in 1 year. And we had to figure out that was the time of the furloughs. That was the time of pension reform. That was the time. There was a lot going on during that time. But that is also the time where STIP and TRIP was created to be able to raise more money for the university. That's also where our procurement strategy came out during that time, to be able to think about system-wide contracts. And so even though we were in a situation that was very, very difficult, you had to kind of deal with that and also think about what are ways that we can be proactive in the thinking. So that was my introduction to UC, which I think is very apropos to the time we're dealing with now. In 2014, I left to go to UC Riverside to be the Vice Chancellor Planning and Budget there. And again, was really working on long-term planning for the campus. We wanted to increase access and affordability. Again, that was my passion. And at the time, UC Riverside only had 23,000 students. I believe it's up to 28,000 now. So it's really amazing to see the growth, right? And to know that those things take time, right? So there's this very long-term, in my experience, a very long-term view that you need to take as a UC leader, as a UC, any role that you have at UC is you have to like put your long-term hat on, right? Regardless of what's going on in the immediate term. These are institutions that last hundreds and hundreds of years. And so you have to be thinking about it in that way. And then in 2017, when I decided to leave UC, the governor decided I was not leaving UC and appointed me a regent. And so for those of you that don't know, regents it's a volunteer position. So I went from getting paid to do UC work to not getting paid to do UC work. But it's a very, I mean, I'm very honored to have been selected. It's a 12-year term. And the responsibilities include being a fiduciary of and oversight for the whole system, including the 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, and 3 national labs. And it also includes basically going to board meetings 6 times a year, 3 days, so about 18 days of meetings. And that's not including any of the side meetings. So like for right now, I'm working on the UC Riverside search, the presidential search, separate meetings that we have for the academic and student affair committee. And so those also are included in the service. And then of course the prep time for the meetings. The board books usually are about 1,000 pages. So it's quite a bit of reading to do the week before and the weekend before the meeting. And then we can get into that for your prior question.
Yeah, and it's
that's
like
just the summary of I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of how I got here. And now I've been on the board for almost 8 years, and I'm the vice chair of the board.
Perfect. Yeah, it's definitely been eye-opening for me to be attending the Regents meetings too. And it's just a jammed packed 2.5 days of just so much information. And when I learned that you all had to read these giant books of information to lead up to that, I'm like, wow, that's a lot, especially for a volunteer role. So we definitely appreciate it. What do you find most fulfilling about being a regent?
That's a great question. I think what I love about being a regent is that I get to see all of UC, right? I had missed that from my time at UC Office of the President to think about really the entirety of the system. I would say that I think over the time, given that I was a staff person, then I was a leader at a campus, now a regent, I'll say everyone plays a really important role. And there's things that you can do as a staff person that you can't do as, like, let's say a vice chancellor, that you can't do as a regent, right? So as an example, our responsibility as regents is not management, right? So launching new cool initiatives, thinking about, when I was a staff member at UC Office of the President under the CFO division, I launched this really cool training it was like a 5-day training that went on, that was like 9 months. And so you trained and then you did a special project and really basically held professional development for our team on the CFO. In the CFL group. We can't do stuff like that as regents, right? That's not the level that the regents operate. We approve buildings, we approve the entirety of the budget, we approve tuition, those types of things. As a vice chancellor, I was doing very deep work on, which was super fun, on thinking about the future of the campus. Regents don't get to do that, yeah. Right, that's like the purview of the campus as well. So, and every role is super important, especially right now, I think, because I think also, I've been at UC now almost basically since 2009, right, to now, in terms of being, and if you think about the time where I was in banking, kind of working for UC as the banker, it's been almost 20 years since 2005. And so it's been a really long time. And I will say one of my key takeaways is that everyone's role is super important and we all have to work together and take ownership of our own roles, right? And what we can do within the function that we have. And that's, I think, what propelled me from where I was to where I am today. I would always take ownership of what's the thing I can do, right? I may only be, again, an assistant director starting a professional development program. That's my area. I could work on that. I could raise my hand. I could say, I'm willing to do the extra work there. Again, different initiatives as a regent. And I think there's a question on this, but we'll talk about the 2050 plan. I raised my hand and said, hey, I'm willing to lead that. There's always things that you, as individuals, can think about. How can we help our university? right now is a really tough time, right? We're dealing with potential big cuts, which I know we'll talk about the severity of those in a little bit. But this is a time for us to be working together. This is a time for us to link hands and say, you know, all our little squabbles kind of, which we have, right? We're a big system, brothers, and it's like brothers and sisters. There's little, you know, campus by campus, competition, all that kind of humanness. But it's time to put those aside right now and be like, how do we work together to ensure the resilience of UC? So I'd say what's my favorite part of being a regent is being able to have these conversations and really help bring people together to move UC forward.
I think it's really important to recognize that we all have our specific roles, but to also know who your partners are, and who you can talk to make things happen. Like, you see a problem, this is an issue, who are the people that can actually move it versus like be the influencers, or, you know, we all have our little pieces in that. So that's a huge piece of how
And we all
Regents.
can do more than we can, right? I think the hardest part is feeling empowered. And I
Yeah,
know because it took me years to feel empowered.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So you could feel like, oh, my role, like I can't do anything, but you can always raise your hand for leadership positions. There are always people that need someone to help drive a thing. Like, we all play that role.
Right. So, considering your role as a regent in shaping the university's future, can you share any goals that you have as a regent, and the policy outcomes that you'd want to achieve, the university to achieve?
Yeah. That's a great question. So the first and foremost, I would say, is I'll start with the long term and then work backwards, right? I think one of my big priorities was the 2050 institutional task force that we put together to lay out really big goals for us to have a vision, is like, what does the next 25 years look like, right? What do we want to achieve? And there were 5 things. Reimagine how and where UC happens. Like, how do we become more accessible in various parts of California? We're in pretty expensive areas of California. There's people in the very north, people inland, that frankly, even like people in Chula Vista, which is 45 minutes to get, or like an hour to get to UC San Diego. We're not necessarily in every community. And so I think the reimagining how and where UC happens is to say, how do we get to, we have our agricultural, natural resource, natural system area that does actually have hundreds of locations. How do we work more closely across all the assets that we have to get to more students, more communities? And so that was priority number 1. Priority number 2 was reflecting the diversity of California. And that's a 2050 goal. That's not going away. We set that as a super important, and that means diversity in all its facets and types. At every level. And the third one was around closing student equity gaps. There's no need for ensuring student success, right? So we wanted to make sure that there's no discrepancies of your graduation rate or your future job prospects because of where you came from, because of your race, because of your income, that every student has the ability to succeed at UC. The fourth was around helping solve California's biggest problems. We have some of the most, I've never met an institution where there's so many just amazing, committed, smart people, right? And that includes staff and faculty and students, all of it. Everyone I meet usually is this like brilliant person that's dedicated their life to UC or is working on their education at UC, but has this big passion. And I think we need to harness that more visibly and together. I think there's a lot of what I see is that there's a lot of amazing smaller projects going on, but we don't necessarily come together and have these big initiatives to say, hey, UC is going to help solve California's housing affordability issue as a big system-wide initiative. So solving California's biggest issues, I think, is the fourth one. And again, these are all things that are going to take time, right? And so that's why they're the 2050 goals, because you cannot get these done in like a year or two, especially when we're dealing with budget cuts in the immediacy. But that doesn't mean you can't have a goal. And then the fifth one was, of course, maintaining our academic and research excellence. So those are the 5, I would say, long-term policy goals that I think we cannot lose sight of. Because I think in many ways, what we're dealing with right now is like an intentional distraction. Let's distract everyone so that they can't actually focus on their long-term goals as they've been set out because they're too busy dealing with all the little fires, right? And we have to deal with the fires, we do.
Yep.
100%, but we also cannot forget our long-term goals. So to me, that's like really critical. In the short term, I would say our biggest policy goals is to really ensure the financial resilience of UC. We're facing an 8% budget cut.
Mhm.
And so regions have been working closely with the chancellors and office of the president to speak to, I've been to Sacramento twice in the last like 3 weeks to talk to different legislators, to make the UC pitch, to, talk about why it's so important to support the university at this time. So I think that's a really important policy goal for me, at least, and I think for most of the regions. And then, of course, to also protect our budget from our federal cuts, whether that be NIH or other attacks on our diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, academic freedom. There's quite a few potential risks there. And to be honest, one of the things the Regents have been really working on is figuring out what are our potential risks and implications of what's coming down federal. And I will say the campuses are working so hard at coming up with those analysis for us, right? So we can see, but it's unclear. It is unclear. We know what we've asked for what's the worst case scenario, what's the best case scenario, what's like a likely scenario. Having been a vice chancellor planning and budget, I will say, I think planning is critical, right? We may not know what's coming, but it's kind of like in the Army, they're like, basically 90% of the work is the planning. And then as soon as you hit ops, it like all goes out the window, but that planning stays with you to figure out what to do next. And so I feel like that's what we have to do here is really do our planning, think about all the potential outcomes, and we won't actually know what's going to happen necessarily in the next 6 months to a year to 2 years. But we can at least be prepared to handle a variety of situations. So those are my, I would say, long-term and immediate goals. I have some intermediate ones, but maybe I'll skip those for now too.
And because we are starting to lean towards that direction, and have touched on budget a bit and what's going on with all that stuff, and also weaving in the piece of accessibility for students, and what specifically can the university do to expand access to more Californians, particularly in the face of the budget constraint. I know a couple of Regents meetings ago, there was talk around technology and online learning and those kind of things. And is that something that we're moving towards, and how does that fit in with all of our budget constraints?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. It kind of goes to what I said earlier, right? That we have to me, keep our eye on the ball for the future while we deal with the budget cuts. So all of you have heard of a hiring freeze, which we hope that by doing this preemptively, it will protect our staff jobs and our faculty jobs for everyone and protect our resources so that we don't have any draconian cuts coming again, but we don't know, right? We just cannot predict what's going to happen. But in the meantime, there's absolutely amazing things happening with technology, AI, and online education to make I think sometimes people have the wrong perspective with online. I at ASU actually worked very, very deeply on digitally enhanced education. And what I'll say is that the function of it is actually to increase access. And so people don't really realize that sometimes. They think, oh, well, you're just not getting as good of an experience. And I'll give you an example of someone who never would have, like, through my ASU hat, and then how I think it applies to UC. And I no longer work at ASU, FY, but I did work at ASU for 6+ years. We had this gentleman, his name was Alex, and Alex was previously incarcerated. And he said that when he got out, he didn't see any pathways for him. Now I have like a video of him if you want to see him. It is so touching. ASU had a pathway program where you could earn your way into being admitted. Didn't matter what your high school grades were. I mean, Alex is 28, I think. It's like, it didn't matter what and he had been, unfortunately incarcerated for, I think, like 5 or 6 years. So it didn't matter what his high school grade was. He showed that he could perform at a R1 AAU level. He passed the courses. We admitted him in. He's now pretty much almost done with his political science degree and is applying to law school right now. And his goal is to help the kids, as he says it, it's the kids that society forgot, like him. He feels like if he had not been forgotten, he wouldn't have ended up where he ended up, and he wants to prevent that from happening in the future, right? The only way he could have done all of this is through ASU's online degree program. More flexibility, more online options. It doesn't, they're not mutually exclusive, right? It doesn't mean you don't have a campus, like people don't get to come to class, but it's an option. You have the option to be able to say, hey, I have 2 kids. I have to work 8 to 5. I can take my class in the evening online and then come to campus 1 day a week or something. We don't have that sort of flexibility yet. And so I do think it's absolutely important that when we don't forget to move forward this goal, and this is part of that reimagine how and where UC happens, it's not going to happen overnight. We know it's expensive, but it's a long-term goal, and we cannot forget, even as we deal with these things, because we have to, you see, like, why should only people that are able to not, well, although most of our students work too, but for the most part, it's pretty constrained. It's very difficult for people that aren't kind of the traditional student to go to UC and get a degree. And so I think that flexibility is key. So yes, online, and especially the type of personalization, I would say, and kind of personalized tutoring that you can do with AI is really remarkable. And I would say it's at the beginning. There's so many issues with it right now, right? It's kind of like at the beginning where people didn't know what a website was. I feel like that's where we all it's like you can't make predictions of like what it is and what it's not right now, because that's like saying, Ask Jeeves is like how we should think about how we should think about online and the web. And that's clearly not how we're thinking about it now. So like, you got to think about it 5-10 years from now, what could it be? And it's up to us, right? To design that future vision. I always say, like, you don't want somebody else to design the vision for you. Like, we want to be the ones designing what we think it should be used for, how it should be used, with our values at the top. How do we create quality, accessible, affordable education for our students? And frankly, also use it to make life easier for our staff and faculty too. The way that we can make all sorts of jobs easier too with AI and technology. So I think there's a lot to explore there in my view.
So funny. I remember being in college and going to the library. That was a seminar on searching stuff, and they were like, there's this new cool thing called Google that you can search stuff on. And it was like how far we've come from, like, as you mentioned, Jeeves, which probably we have people on that wouldn't even know what Jeeves is, but
people don't know what Ask Jeeves are. I look younger than I am. People usually
right?
I'm
Yes.
like, trust me, I know what Ask Jeeves are. I'm not that young.
So speaking of, since we kind of touched on this a little bit, about, staying true to our mission and our values and our core, how is the university navigating threats to science education and academic freedom that we're hearing about?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Oh, did not come clear. How is the university navigating threats to science education and academic freedom?
Yeah. With a lot of intentionality and a lot of discussion and debate, I will say, right? Again, there's regental roles and management roles. And I will say though, many like, this is not something that is not being taken seriously, right? If that's a message, it's like leadership. And I can see it even from my own regental role, which is not in the day-to-day and it's not there 24/7. But even at our last regent meeting, we had a 4-hour conversation, like it was almost a 4-hour conversation about this and what we were going to do. And I think this is a time that we need to act as a system, because what happens at one UC can easily happen at any other UC, or, a message that goes out for one UC affects us all. And so I think this is where the power of 10 and the power of being a system really comes is like really where the benefit is. The fact that we have the expertise of everyone spending all their time thinking about how are we going to navigate this. And again, I would say we're obviously, these are core values to UC. And we have all sorts of advisors and lawyers and things, and discuss and like very deep discussions between regents and chancellors and leadership at the office of the president. So I don't think we have the full answers yet. I think we're still working through them, but I will let everyone know that it is something that, you know, keeps me up at night, and I know keeps many of the leadership up at night.
We all just have to remember that we all believe in the mission of higher education advances society in all aspects of society. And it's so important. So we keep moving forward, right? So looking into the very immediate future, with President Drake announcing his departure on June 30th. And for those who might not be familiar with the process, could you explain a little bit about what the university can expect during the presidential search, which obviously has been going on for several months now? What's the timeline look like, and what steps will be involved as the board works to identify that next leader?
Yeah, well, we are well on our way in the process. I think Jen talked about it at the very beginning of the process earlier this, I don't even remember when it was. It was like either earlier this year or late last year. We had a wonderful day where we got to hear from CUCSA and faculty and students and alumni and all the chancellors and the medical center folks about what they wanted to see in a UC president. So there is a lot riding on this decision. I think we can all agree that we need a, you know, President Drake has been an absolutely amazing president. I think that represents all our UC values. He embodies them, right? He lives them day to day. And so I think we're looking for someone very much, was what we heard from pretty much all the stakeholders. How do we keep what we're, you know, make sure our leadership doesn't change too much? Like, we want someone like President Drake that's leading the ship, that's advocating for us at the state, being the voice of education globally, ensuring that he or she is working very closely with faculty and staff and leaders on, you know, all the needs there as well, including, again, not a regentful role, but compensation and working conditions, and all those things are important things that at least come up to us as items. And so there has to be a president that puts a priority on doing the work there as well, right, with the chancellors. So I think those are a few of the things that we're looking for. And I would say we're in the final stretch now. I'm not sure how much longer it's going to take, but I think I can't even say I'm confident, because I don't want to jinx myself. If we stay, I'll say this, if we stay on track, we will have a new president by June.
Excellent. That's good to know. So we received several questions from staff regarding budget cuts, staff impacts. We know about the hiring freeze, healthcare plans, salary increases for non-represented staff, all the financial things. And we know that these important concerns, many of these decisions fall out of the Board of Regents, like the meat of those decisions. But could you explain a little bit about the Regents' role in reviewing and approving key financial decisions presented by the administration, and what does the board and does the board ensure that these decisions align with the long-term stability and well-being of staff at the university as a whole?
Yeah, I would say that high level, what you just said at the end, ensuring that the broad budget plan aligns with the financial well-being of the institution and all its constituents, is exactly what our role is, right? So we don't get to decide whether we experience layoffs, whether there's furloughs, those are management decisions, whether there's budget cuts, what the contract looks like. But we do, at the end of the day, vote on our overall budget at least for the UC Office of the President, and do that in the context of, is this meeting the goals that we think are important for UC?
And we're kind of rolling into our last few minutes here. I do have a question though, and it's not on the list, so I apologize. And if you don't want to answer it, that's okay. But how do the regents feel and react with public comment? Because as you know, as CUCSA, we are encouraging lots of public comment from staff. How do those messages hit? How do you all hear them?
Yeah.
What's the impact of that public comment? Because I want to encourage people to know that you all are listening. What does it feel like from your end when you're fielding those inquiries?
Yeah, I think public comment is really important, right? That's what it's there for, is to hear from the public. And so I really appreciate hearing from, again, back to reflecting the diversity of California. That means hearing all the viewpoints, right? You have to, living the values can be uncomfortable. But guess what? That's the point of the values, is like values means free speech and hearing all the diverse viewpoints, and that means hearing all the diverse viewpoints, right? And so I think it's important for us to hear it. And you know, they really range of all matters, and sometimes half of them are contradicting the other half. So you're like, okay, we heard this positive comment, but then, you know, like people are pro this one action, but then people are against the one action. But I personally really think it's important to hear them. And I would say what I really I think also is helpful is when we get handouts.
Okay.
So like data handouts, people usually like hand them to someone at the Regents office, and then they'll distribute them to us. And I find that to be the most helpful, because then it's something, sometimes there's so many topics, to be honest, like you can't remember all of them. And so when you have a handout, when you have data, it's easier to follow up on things, ask, and usually what we can do too, if like we want more information, we'll ask the office of the president or our regent's office to gather more information on a particular topic that we heard about. So I would continue to tell you to stress people coming to public comment and making their viewpoints heard.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to remember that to keep trying, because sometimes, I mean, when they announce and they're like, we have 100 people on the list, and there's no way you're going to get to all those people.
We can't hear them all the time.
Yeah. And so we just want to encourage people to continue signing up, continue.
Yeah, and now we have the call-in option too, so you don't have to risk. I think that was obviously an issue too, is like people are driving really far distances sometimes to do public comment, and then they don't get to speak. And that is not something we want. And so I think the call-in option makes it hopefully easier for people to participate and to be able to put their name in, and not have to necessarily make, you know, the various strives to it. So I would encourage people to leverage that option as well.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so we have just a few minutes left with you. So as a final question, what message would you like to leave with staff as we continue to navigate the challenges ahead?
Yeah. You know, the one thing I would really stress is this idea that I think we're stronger. I always say we're strongest together. And this is a time where we have to come together. And so I just encourage all of you to be working with your colleagues across your campuses, within your campuses, across the campuses. These times are not going to be easy. They're not easy. The best thing we can do is trust in each other, right? We have to trust in each other. I think the erosion of trust in society is something that's a real issue. And I hope that we as UC strong community can keep that trust, because that's what's going to help us be resilient and overcome whatever challenges come our immediate way and keep going. Because it is the greatest public and, you know, university in the world. And the way we keep it there is because of our staff, because of our faculty, and because of our students. And like I said, I was a staff. I met hundreds and hundreds of staff members, and I've never met such dedicated, intelligent, committed, passionate people about education. I mean, people give their whole energy and life to this work, right? And we need to keep doing that right now and work together on that. So another thing I want to do is last thing is just express my gratitude for all the amazing work that I know you all do day in and day out. The university would not be able to function without you. And so just really appreciate all your energy and your love that you put into this.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you. I know that we've seen each other at Regents meetings, and a lot of times we don't get to, you know, align because there's so much going on, but we really appreciate you giving your time to us here to allow staff to hear more about the Regents, what the role is, and your dedication to our system, our university. Really appreciate you being here today. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. And I'm going to pass it back to Jen to wrap up with some other announcements.
Thank you, Desiree, and thank you, Vice Chair, so much. We really appreciate it. Our next CUCSA Town Hall will be on July 8th, featuring a Q&A session with the CUCSA work groups. So the final presentations will be recorded in early June and posted to our CUCSA website for you to watch prior to the June 8th Town Hall. The event will allow you to, as audience members, ask questions and provide feedback to the work groups on their recommendations. We do have a web page that's dedicated to our work groups that will be put in the chat if you want to see what they're working on this year. And we're always trying to get people more engaged in staff advocacy. So if you're interested in becoming a staff advocate, visit our CUCSA homepage for links to each of the location staff assembly pages. A link to that page will be in the chat. And then if you're looking for an even bigger role, you might want to consider applying to be the next staff advisor to the Regents. Those applications close next Friday. And lastly, if you haven't already, I do encourage you to sign up for the UC Advocacy Network, which is also known as UCAN. As you can see here on the screen, UCAN provides templates for contacting your legislator. You simply input your information, review the letter, and hit send. It really could not be any easier. And our legislators need to hear from us now more than ever. So please take 30 seconds to email them. You may think that your one email doesn't make a difference, but I assure you that it does. The more traffic that they receive, the more support they see that they're getting from their community. And again, thank you all for attending our town hall today. The video recording will be posted to CUCSA's YouTube shortly and to our website and sent out in our newsletter. And how you can stay connected with us is on the screen and also in the chat. You can visit our link tree to find all of the links to our social media, subscribe to our newsletter if you aren't already, and if you want to connect with CUCSA. So thank you. I hope everyone is well. And take care. We look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great day.